Hi everybody, welcome back. This is part 3 of our learning video. Unfortunately, I am now sick and the original narration got deleted off of this somehow. So now you're going to have to listen to a sick person talk if you choose to listen to this video. Sorry about that. In this video, we're going to talk about punishment, stimulus generalization, stimulus control, shaping, biological constraints, behavioral modification, cognitive learning theory, latent learning, and observational learning. I guess we'll start here with punishment. Punishment is a stimulus that decreases the probability that a previous behavior will occur again. So anytime we use punishment, it is to inhibit a particular behavior. There's two types of punishment. There's positive punishment and negative punishment. When we talk about positive and negative in psychology, we're not talking about good and bad. We're usually talking about whether we're adding something or taking something away. In this case, positive punishment means that we're adding something. So the addition of something negative is going to weaken a response, weaken the response. So, for example, you keep leaving the dishes on the counter, not rinsing them, and all of a sudden mom says, "Hey, you need to, you now have to do the dishes. I am, punishing you by adding something negative. You have to do the dishes for like the week now." And this type of punishment was put in place to decrease the likelihood that you're going to leave a dirty dish on the counter unrinsed again. So that would be positive punishment. Negative punishment would be the removal of something positive or the removal of something nice. Um, so in this case, it would be, geesh, you keep coming home late without calling after curfew. You've been told, so as a punishment, I'm going to take away your car keys for a week. So you're not going to be able to drive your car for a week. And that's a negative punishment. You're removing something pleasant or nice in order to decrease the likelihood of the behavior of coming home beyond curfew. Using punishment can kind of be tricky business. Punishment is really appropriate for stopping dangerous behaviors. And the thing about punishment is oftentimes it's a temporary suppression of the negative behavior. And this temporary suppression might provide an opportunity for us to reward a better behavior or to reinforce a more desirable behavior. If punishment is used incorrectly, you can end up, you're using it too frequently. It can become ineffective. The punished behavior may be replaced with even a less desirable behavior. Physical punishment has harmful side effects such as fear, low self esteem, um, and punishment does not relay information about alternative, more desired behavior. So, if you're going to use punishment, it's really important to present at the same time, hey, here's some things you could have done instead of what you did. Provide some alternate behavior that you would like to see. This is what you could have done instead. And give them a way to respond differently in the future. Shaping, reinforcing things that don't come naturally. So, the process of teaching a complex behavior by rewarding closer and closer approximations of the desired behavior. So, if you are wanting to teach an animal a complex move or a complex behavior, what you'll do is you will start reinforcing any behaviors that are similar to what you're looking for or that are steps involved in what you're looking for. Um, After they get to a point where they're responding more consistently, then you would reinforce only responses closer to the behavior that you ultimately want to teach, and finally reinforce the desired behavior. So, uh, for example, if I'm teaching a dog, I want to teach the dog I'm going to pretend I shoot it and it's going to fall to the ground, and then it's going to put its legs out. If I want to do that, the first thing, I'm going to have it like lay on the ground and then crawl and then tip over. So for that portion of it, the first thing I'm going to have to do is teach the dog to sit, which is not the laying down behavior that I want, but it's getting closer. Then after teaching him to sit, I can teach him to lay. And then after teaching him to lay, I'll teach him to crawl, and we're going to chain these behaviors together. A better example of shaping will be on the next slide, I hope. Yeah, sort of. Um, so shaping, once again, we're going to reward successive approximations of the target behavior. Um, we're going to look at an illustration here in a minute that has some pigeons. There we go. Or not pigeons, I guess in this case we have some parrots. Lovebirds, I think. So basically, when we look at this one, shaping would be, if you'll notice, we have these parrots that are facing towards the bell. You can see those little blue dots. That's reinforcement with food. So anytime the bird turns and progresses towards the bell, they get reinforced with food. If they stop and turn around and go the other way, they don't get food. So here we're shaping the animal by teaching it that, oh, if I go this direction, I'm going to get the food. And then pretty soon, they're expected to do more each time. Like after a while, it's supposed to be, okay, now you got to go all the way here before you get your food. And now when we get down to the end, in order to get your food, you have to peck the bell. Because birds will naturally peck something. So pecking a bell is something that they would figure out to do. So we just, you start off like every time they turn and go the right direction, you give them the treat. And then pretty soon it'll be like they turn around, they go the right direction several steps, and then you give them the treat. And then the next time they turn around the correct way and they walk even more steps, and then you give them a treat. So they're just getting closer and closer to the desired behavior until they learn to get down here and just peck the bell. Okay, moving slide. Discrimination and operant conditioning. So we learned about stimulus generalization and stimulus discrimination in previous videos. Stimulus discrimination is the ability to respond differently to similar stimuli. For example, the dog touches one target with his nose and a different target with his paw. Like when you're teaching like a movie dog or something, complex behaviors, like he's got to stand on his mark and he's got to reach out and touch something with his nose. Um, the dog can look at these two different cues, these two different stimuli, and know that he has to do one stimuli with his nose and one with his paw. And he can discriminate between the two. Stimulus control. Behavior is reinforced in the presence of a specific stimulus, but not in its absence. For example, I'm really sorry about being sick here, guys, but this is the best I can do. I didn't want you to not have the video. In those Skinner boxes that we saw pictures of earlier, a rat may get a food pellet when the green light is on, but not when the red light is on. So there might be a green light and a red light. And so the rat knows to not even bother to push the lever unless the green light is on. And unfortunately, we can't share all these videos, and I'll have to try to, these links don't work on this video or anything, but so you're not able to watch these videos. But in the future, maybe I'll figure out how to embed them in there. Generalization and operant conditioning. Stimulus generalization means demonstrating a conditioned response to stimuli that are similar to the previously reinforced stimulus. So a pigeon that was conditioned to peck at a medium-sized red circle, that pigeon will also peck at a large and small red circle. So basically he's generalizing that, oh, this is a red circle, regardless of size, I should peck at it. But he doesn't peck at any of the green circles of any size because he hasn't received any reinforcement for doing that. Biological constraints on learning. Well, built-in limitations in the ability of animals to learn particular behaviors. So basically, if you're trying to teach an animal to do something that's outside of its realm of natural ability to do things, um, it's going to be a lot harder. Like a bird can learn to press a lever, but wow, that is just not a natural thing for a bird to do. For birds, it's really easy to teach them certain responses, teach them to peck certain things because pecking is a very natural response for them. For rats, pressing the lever is more natural because their little paws are always exploring and feeling things. So basically, you want to consider when you are trying to train an animal or condition an animal in some way, you want to make sure that what you're doing is in the realm of their abilities. Okay, comparing classical and operant conditioning. Classical conditioning is the association between stimuli and its involuntary natural innate behavior. Because remember, those were involuntary behaviors with that type of conditioning. Operant conditioning, we are looking at reinforcement and voluntary responses. So with operant conditioning, it's the organism's choice whether or not to do the thing. It is not some biological automatic thing that's occurring like in classical conditioning. All right, behavior modification is a technique we use oftentimes. You start seeing this from the time you first go to school. Um, it's defined here as a formalized technique for promoting the frequency of desired behaviors and decreasing the incidence of unwanted ones. So let's say that we have a little Timmy and he is just being an absolute terror in kindergarten. And so if we want to do like a behavior modification chart for this kid, we would probably start by having to do observation. So you would go into the classroom, you'd spend like several days just sitting there with your clipboard and whatever, observing the class until they get used to you and start acting normal again. Once they start out acting normal, then you start monitoring the particular behaviors that you're interested in with little Timmy. Like maybe little Timmy is, biting the teacher and pushing kids and kicking the tables and things like that, whatever it is. So you're going to record the incidence of, how frequently is he doing these behaviors. And then you're going to decide on a technique that you're going to use to modify this behavior. Maybe in this case, we're going to have, every time he's doing something good, you're going to try to give him a star. And when he's not doing, when he kicks somebody or bites or whatever, we're going to take a star away. So maybe we're going to do something like that as our way of doing modification. So the steps that we're going to go through: identify goals and target behaviors. We want Timmy to have more pro social behaviors, and we want to kind of try to extinguish some of these antisocial behaviors. We're going to design a data recording system to record preliminary data. So basically, usually you'll just have a little chart and you put little hash marks on there for each time you see the particular behavior that you are interested in. Select a behavior change strategy. In this case, we've decided to use a star chart. Implement the program. So now we're trying the program. We're a couple weeks in, and we're going to take a look and see how Timmy's doing because we keep very good records. And we're going to say, oh, you know what? This has really helped Timmy. He's not like kicking chairs anymore or biting anybody. But we have this other behavior that this hasn't seemed to reach. So you have to evaluate the program, and maybe we'll have to do something else to try to curb a different behavior. So you just reevaluate as you go along and make modifications to your plan as needed. Okay, moving on to cognitive learning theory. An approach to the study of learning that focuses on the thought processes that underlie learning. So far we've kind of been talking about, um, you know, doing things because of reinforcement, not doing things because of punishment. We've talked about physiological responses to stuff, but we haven't really talked about the cognitive or thinking part, thought processes when it comes to learning. So it's not enough to say that people respond because there is an assumed link between a stimulus and a response. Instead, the idea that people develop an expectation that they will receive a reinforcer after making a response. So, in other words, none of these things really work in a vacuum. All of these things are kind of working together in most circumstances. And um, so, secondary reinforcers gain their reinforcing ability because they have reliably predicted the occurrence of primary reinforcers. For example, I go to work and I make money. Uh, that money is a secondary reinforcer, which is going to help me get a primary reinforcer. The primary reinforcer would be food. I can buy groceries, um, which is something that is a primary uh, reinforcer, by going to work, which is my secondary reinforcer. Okay, and so basically, your expectations play a large role in learning theory. One type of cognitive learning is called latent learning. Latent learning is pretty interesting. It's basically learning that occurs, but you didn't really know that it was happening. So, this maze that you're seeing here is an example of latent learning. Well, is used to demonstrate latent learning. In one famous study, three groups of rats were basically one at a time run through the maze. Now, the first group was given food at the end of the maze. So, for the first 10 days of the study, every time the rat was put in, he'd run down there and he'd find the food. The second group and the third group of rats, when they ran through, they were not given any food. Now, on day 11, the groups, one of the groups that had not been receiving food was given food. And so on day 13, the day after they received the food, those rats that had only received the food on day 11 ran the maze just as fast as the rats that were getting food for those first 10 days. Basically, they were wandering around and learned the maze, but they had no reason to demonstrate that learning. There was just no reason to demonstrate that they knew where the end of the maze was, because they didn't have motivation to do it. Once the food was put there and they had motivation, then they demonstrated clearly that they had just as good a knowledge of where the exit is than any of the other rats. Now, the third group of rats, they never did get food because they were kind of a control group. So that's why. Anyway, so latent learning occurs without reinforcement and is not demonstrated until there's a reason to show such learning. Another example would be like, let's say you're visiting a relative in another town, and you go there a few times a year to visit this relative, but you don't like shop there or anything like that. And somebody at the gas station in that town asks, hey, do you know where the CVS pharmacy is? And you're like, yeah, I know where it is. You've never been to that CVS, but you've learned where it is, even though you never went there, and you're able to give that person directions. So that's kind of a human example of the latent learning. So just a quick recap, latent learning is learning in which a new behavior is not demonstrated until some incentive is provided for displaying it. It occurs without reinforcement. Basically, what's happening in this type of learning is that you're making a cognitive map or a mental representation of spatial locations and directions. And those things are already being built in your mind kind of automatically. And from there, you have knowledge that you didn't know you even had. All right, the last part of learning is that we talked about here is, sorry about that, I got attacked by kittens. Um, okay, so observational learning is basically something that is kind of a no-brainer today. We all know that kids learn from watching us and pick up things from viewing what we do. The old adage of do as I say, not as I do, doesn't really work. They're going to do what you do regardless of what you say, um, because they learn observation through observation very strongly. Back in the day, people didn't really understand this about kids. They kind of thought that they were just little adults. And so it was kind of a big breakthrough when Albert Bandura did this experiment to demonstrate observational learning. Sorry, I had to pause for a minute. This place is crazy. So basically, once again, it wasn't intuitive until Albert Bandura did this study. And basically, what he did is he had like a group of kids watch a lady through the glass interact with a doll called a Bobo doll. It's kind of a big clown that wobbles. You whack it in the head, and it like flips right back up. Um, and so we had one group of children view her go in and kind of just beat the crap out of Bobo, like just beat him up and smack him around and say certain phrases and hit him with a hammer and stuff like that. And then the second group of kids basically watched the lady interact with Bobo just in a nice way and just kind of played nice and normal with him. So the way it worked is when the kids first arrived, they came in and they had a room full of very nice toys, and Bobo was in there also. So then towards the end of this, when then the kids all played with the toys, and then they came out, and then they were sent to their groups to either watch the lady beat up Bobo or the lady be nice to Bobo. Then they returned the child individually. Each child returned to the room, but they had taken out all the good toys and basically left Bobo in there. And so what they found was that a high percentage of the children who watched the lady beat up Bobo actually beat up Bobo and even said the phrases that she said as she was beating up Bobo and smacking him with the hammer and stuff like that. Whereas the kids that did not observe an adult beating up Bobo, well, most of them did not beat up Bobo. So that just kind of supported the idea that it matters what our children are seeing and that they learn through observation. Um, Once again, there's a link here that you guys can't access, and if I could learn how, I would embed it in here, which I think I'll be able to do pretty soon. Anyway, um, I just wanted to finish up this PowerPoint this way, and I hope it is useful in some way. I hope you guys have a good day. Talk to you soon.